Let's move on to some folks who can help us make sense of it from their perspective. And as I say, we've got a great panel. I'm going to give each of the panelists a chance to sort of give a little introduction, and then we'll just move to an open Q&A, and you can direct questions to any individual or just more broadly. So we'll start with Sean Burke. And as I mentioned, all of these people were there at the creation, right? You'll see them, their companies, and them listed in the in the docket, in the decision. So we're fortunate to have Sean Burke from Northeast Clean Energy Council. He is a policy associate working on NECEC's New England policy team. Previously, Sean was the senior policy analyst at Power Options, where he advocated on members' behalf at the regulatory and legislative level. Sean has also interned for Senator Elizabeth Warren in constituent services. He holds a bachelor's degree in government from St. Lawrence University. So Sean, I'll ask you to unmute yourself.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you, Mark, Bernie, and Patrice for convening this panel. I think it's timely, and even I learned a lot from Josh's overview there, having participated closely in the docket. And also want to thank Josh and PURA for the work that they did to come to a decision that I think will drive development in Connecticut. So I guess I'll start with an overview of NECEC and our perspective, and then Mark has asked me to compare Connecticut's program to some of the programs around the region that we work on, and some of the major similarities and differences, and perhaps opportunities for improvement. So NECEC, Northeast Clean Energy Council, we're a mission-driven organization, and our mission is to build a world-class clean energy hub here in the Northeast, and to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. And we do so on behalf of our roughly 200 members who span the clean energy spectrum, solar, storage, wind, fuel cells, you name it, we probably have a company that does it. And so we work on their behalf to promote policies that will get us to a cleaner future. So in terms of comparing the Connecticut program to other states, I think I'll start with a quick overview of other programs and then drive into the key differences. Starting with Massachusetts, which probably has the largest program in New England, actually definitely has the largest program in New England, called the SMART program. And it's a declining block program, which essentially means that there are 200 megawatt blocks at a certain compensation rate. And then once that block is filled up, it steps down to the next level between a 2 and 4% decrease in value between blocks. And that program is currently 1,600 megawatts, and there's a process to expand it to 3,200 megawatts. I think one really important thing to note about the SMART program is it contains a number of adders for project types and locations. So public projects receive an adder, low-income projects sited on landfills. There's a whole host of adders that incentivize the type of development that the state wants. And it's also important to note that outside of the SMART program, the net metering cap still exists in net metering still exists in Massachusetts. And in fact, the cap on the number of megawatts that are allowed through net metering was just lifted this year for private projects that serve on-site load. So a lot of opportunity in Massachusetts. And then turning to Maine, which is relatively new to the game, having a new governor that was more friendly to solar than the previous governor. When she took over, supported legislation that significantly expanded what's called the net energy billing program, which has led to significant uptake, and actually led to so much uptake that this session the legislature closed the program going forward for projects that are larger than 2 megawatts. So under 2 megawatt projects can still participate, but larger than 2 megawatts are no longer able to. And then and that's similar. That program is similar to net metering, yeah, it is substantially similar. And then Rhode Island is probably the program that has the most similarities to the structure that Connecticut has adopted here. The Renewable Energy Growth Program is auction-based and also is split up by project size and project type. They also allow wind to participate. And one key difference is that Rhode Island has a separate virtual net metering program for municipalities that is unrelated to the Renewable Energy Growth Program and uncapped. So I've said a lot there, and I know it's a lot to take in, but I also wanted to just highlight what some of the key differences in the Connecticut program are with those programs. And I think I want to start with the beneficial electrification that Josh talked about, and the importance and kind of innovation that PURA took with adopting an ability to size projects for planned future electrification. I think across New England, it's clear that our goals are sending us to a future that is decarbonized and that is significant, that drives a significant amount of transportation and heating towards electric use cases. And so allowing solar to, this program to incorporate that future is innovative and I think a really great evolution of the program. Another key difference is that Connecticut is kind of unique in its restrictions on virtual net metering. And I think the biggest restriction for this program is that projects are required to be sited on a customer's premises, which is kind of unique around the region. And to give an example, municipalities might not have the land available to site a solar project or other low emissions project, and on their own land. They would prefer to have it on land owned by a private entity, and that's not allowed through this program, but has been allowed in the past. And that's a statute, as Josh said, a statutory requirement. I think that there's also, and maybe the biggest difference is the size of the program. And as I mentioned, Massachusetts's program is 3,200 megawatts. And that program started in 2018 and is expected to run probably through 2025. So that's almost 500 megawatts annually through the Massachusetts program. Maine, despite only opening up in 2019, anticipates that the over 2 megawatt projects will account for roughly 750. We think it's probably closer to 1,000 megawatts of projects by 2024. So a significant amount of development for a state that doesn't really have a lot of load, but does have a lot of land. And then Rhode Island, which again has probably the most similar structure program to Connecticut, is 40 to 50 megawatts annually. And it's interesting to compare because Rhode Island is about half of the load of Connecticut. It has roughly the same program size for solar. And I think that overall, and we can talk more about some of the details during the panel, but I think that what this underscores is that Connecticut has a need to provide a vision for the role of distributed solar and distributed generation, clean generation generally, in the state's decarbonized future, with Governor Lamont's executive order for zero carbon electricity by 2040, and other states committing to significant amounts of clean energy development. There's going to be a need to ensure that customers in the state are able to participate in that, and laying out that forward-looking vision, I think would be really helpful. So that's all I've got. Thank you for the opportunity, and happy to take any questions or further discussion when it's time.
John, thank you very much. That's really a really interesting overview. It's always great to look at Connecticut, relative to other states, and it's nice that we've got this favorable beneficial electrification. But it seems like on a lot of the other areas, particularly the size, we are really behind the eight ball there. So let's move on. I know there's going to be questions, but let's get all the panelists activated, and then we'll go to some more questions. So next up is Mike Trahan. Mike is Executive Director of Solar Connecticut, the state's solar industry business group, which works on behalf of residential installers and commercial developers to reduce barriers that limit the growth of solar in Connecticut. Solar Connecticut was an active participant in the PURA docket that settled the new commercial tariff. In recent years, Solar Connecticut has been responsible for initiating legislation or regulatory policy on issues ranging from net metering, interconnection guidelines, and tax exemptions to reducing demand charges, voltage variation, and permitting. So, Mike, if you haven't done so, please unmute. Over to you.
Morning, Mark. Thank you. My audio okay?
Yes, it's great. Thanks.
Terrific. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to PACE for the opportunity. And so for those on the call who've participated in this long docket, it's been, in our view, on the view of contractors in the state, it's been a great example of a completely open and transparent process that didn't just give stakeholders a voice, but actually incorporated stakeholder input into the tariff outcome. So thanks to you, Josh, and the people at PURA who worked so hard on this docket. For those of you who were involved with the original ZREC docket 10 years ago, you know that this most recent docket on commercial solar was longer and more intense than that one was, but it certainly was a more welcoming opportunity that gave everyone a voice. And we're so thankful that so many of the things that the contractors and business people who are familiar with the program actually showed up in the actual tariff final product. My main comment is that while PURA doesn't determine the size of the commercial programs in the state, that's the legislature's role. And Josh spoke a little bit about caps and other limits on program size, and Sean did a nice job in comparing the state to others. We hear a lot about successful ZREC installations over the last 10 years. What you don't hear as much about is the many projects that wanted a ZREC, or an LREC for that matter, but didn't get one because demand in Connecticut for commercial solar simply outstrips program size. And that goes for the basic program, that goes for virtual net metering. It speaks to, we'll speak to SCEF sooner than later. In the case of virtual net metering, the program has been capped for 3+ years. And if nothing gets done in the next legislature, we'll be pushing 4 years, which is a real shame because those municipalities and agricultural property owners who are looking to participate in virtual net metering have not been able to in recent years. We've done a lot that we could to organize those groups and bring their concerns and complaints to the legislature over the last couple of years, but it's fallen on deaf ears. So we're extremely disappointed. This doesn't have as much to do with the docket, but I mean, in making the docket work and making tariffs work, we're extremely disappointed in the legislature's Energy Committee. The leadership there have not listened to us. They've not listened to municipalities. They've not listened to business people who've told them that they need greater program size here. As Sean said, these programs in Connecticut are woefully inadequate compared to size to other states. In terms of jobs, you hear a lot from the new administration in Washington to link job creation with the development of more clean power. Connecticut ranks 18th in the country in terms of solar jobs per capita. We've not created a single job in solar in the last several years. And I think that's a failure on the part of the Lamont administration. We're disappointed that not more has been done in that case as well. And if there's only point that I can make and leave you with today, we talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of the program. We really don't have much to offer there. we've submitted many motions and correspondence to PURA, and a lot of it again showed up in the final product. The message that I would leave with you is that we need a stronger coalition to come together from all corners to work with the legislature and help them understand the importance in connecting clean power with job creation in the renewable energy industry. So while we're celebrating the creation of a terrific new program, let's agree to work together going forward so that we can increase the pie and see if we put more people to work and put more solar and other renewables on rooftops and open ground spaces around the state. Thanks very much.
Mike, thank you very much for that. I think insight into what's really going on here, and also for your call to action. Let's flesh it out a little bit in the Q&A. There have been a bunch of questions already in the chat about why we have these caps. Do we need these caps? So I think that's not the end of the discussion. But let's get to Jeff Macel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So last but not least is Jeffrey Macel, co-founder and managing director of Lodestar Energy. Jeff has developed and financed more than $300 million or 120 megawatts of renewable energy projects across 8 states. Prior to launching Lodestar, Jeff founded All True Energy and also worked as an attorney in private practice at 2 AmLaw 50 law firms, representing public and private companies, private equity funds, financial institutions in a variety of businesses and industries, including renewable energy, finance, and real estate, and multiple tax equity transactions. He serves on the Avon Clean Energy Commission as well. Jeff, please unmute yourself, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and thanks to Director Ryer and Sean and Mike as well, and thank you to Bernie and Patrice for their hard work putting this together. It's been a fascinating ride since Bill 1080, when we saw the virtual net metering and LREC, EREC programs come into existence in the state, and it's really been an interesting evolution to 1935 and these new PURA tariffs that have come out as a result of that. DEEP has done a fantastic job trying to balance their role on the environmental side and the energy side. It is a challenging role, and they've worked hard to put together the STEPS program to focus on responsibly siting solar in Connecticut. PURA's work here has been yeoman's work to try to pull together all of these different stakeholder perspectives into a cohesive tariff that continues the evolution of solar in the state and also looks forward. And it's going to be important to look at the Connecticut Green Bank's role in this and helping to administer some of the programs going forward. For each of these organizations, it's a balancing act of sorts. And on the PURA side, they have to balance the innovation coming in with the impact to ratepayers. And that's super important. I think, as Sean and Mike have pointed out, this bill passed in 2019, hence why 1935 is the bill number. Part of our challenge here in Connecticut has been getting bills through this process to actual actionable regulation. So we're sitting in 2021 right now. We did have a pandemic in the midst here, which certainly slowed things down. But I think part of our job as members of this community is to help accelerate this. There's a lot happening on the innovation side. And I'd like to point back to Director Ryer's comments on the adders for brownfields and landfills that are part of this bill, and talk about how we may add other adders. You and I, Mark, have worked together on trying to look at solar canopies, and we have to look at energy storage, part of the programs that Sean Burke mentioned. Rhode Island has a canopy program. Massachusetts has a canopy program. They both have energy storage programs. We are still working hard to try to get those programs implemented in this state. And one of the most important things we can do is create a value distributed energy study that will create the baseline so that when we add these adders on, we know what we're adding on top of that. A new law has passed this year, a jobs bill, which will also We'll also create a subsidy for labor in the state, which is fantastic. We're totally behind this. The challenge will be that we do need to baseline where we are now so that any increased costs we can quantify at PURA. And that will, of course, enable things like solar canopies. And part of the Commissioner in Deep's focus is responsibly siting solar projects. And solar canopies are a fantastic way to do that. But in order to do that, these adders need to be correctly sized. And these slides you pulled up here are ones that we put together just to show what has been done in New England, in particular around solar canopies and the incentive rates. So for those who aren't knowledgeable about solar canopies, it's pretty simple. These can be parking canopies, as most may know them or see them here in Connecticut. West Farms Mall in Farmington, West Hartford, New Britain has solar canopies now. Also, Buckland Hills Mall in Manchester has them. It's really fascinating. This picture happens to be a site that we just developed in Lancaster, Massachusetts. It is the largest solar canopy in New England. It's over an auto recycling yard, so it serves dual functions. And that's one of the beauties of solar canopies. You're covering an impervious surface already, so stormwater impacts are none, and you're getting a dual use out of it. You're getting protection for the item that's under there. Here it happens to be cars. They're done on farms as well, so you see ag solar canopies as well, where farming equipment gets put under them. But this is really the gold standard of responsible solar development. It's serving dual use from a land use perspective, having little or no environmental impact, and you're also getting energy generation out of it. So next slide, please. So these are just a survey of the programs in New England, and New York and New Jersey or Mid-Atlantic, but just looking at what the overall rates are for these programs. Con Edison territory right here across the state line in from Connecticut and New York, there's a 30% overall rate, which is compensated to help pay for the additional costs of constructing a solar canopy. Massachusetts adds a 6% adder on top of its existing rates. And coincidentally, at the bottom, Rhode Island has the same 6-cent adder. So there's really two ways to do this: an overall compensation rate or an adder rate. It would be great to see a program in Connecticut that really looked to these states as leaders to try to implement something. Next slide, please. So there's a number of sources for this. I just put these in here. I thought it would be helpful if anyone wants to look at where these incentives or adders are housed. Massachusetts, it's in the SMART program. These are the final regulations. New Jersey, the BPU put out a piece on this. In New York, NYSERDA has also put out all of their data. And Rhode Island, the Energy Commission has put this out as well. I think that's the final slide. Mark, you can go to the next one. I'm not sure there is one. So this is the fun slide. This is a picture of the construction of our facility in Lancaster, Massachusetts. We had 12 of these tables, as you can see on the lower portion of this photo. There are 6 fully constructed tables, with 2 tables being constructed immediately behind those. And then if you look far out in the distance, you'll see an additional 5 tables that are in the further out portion of this auto recycling facility. But this is just a great opportunity for us in Connecticut, one that I hope we can start to delve into to try to accelerate the deployment of solar canopies, car chargers, and energy storage at facilities. One of the great things we've seen is auto manufacturers talking about being fully electric in their fleets by 2025 to 2030. This is an opportunity for us to really accelerate our renewable portfolio standard compliance and eventually get to what I hope will be a net zero energy economy. So I think that's it. There may be a few other photos in here, Mark, but I don't think there's any more substance to this. I look forward to the discussion about these, and would like to emphasize that it'd be great for us to try to expedite how we have these discussions so that we can get these technologies in the field sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Really interesting. Again, a multi-state perspective and a really cool pictures of that project up in Massachusetts. We've got a lot of questions we did not get to in the chat. What I'd like to do is, I think there's been so much discussion of this issue of the size of the programs. So I'd like to just start with that one because I think it's kind of the elephant in the room. Mike, you had some very forceful comments about where we are. Sean, you compared us to other states and where there are either no limits or very much more substantial limits. Josh, you're permitted to dodge this one because that was sort of given to you, but I also want to invite you, if you have any thoughts about the questions in the chat. Do we need the limits? Are they necessary? And we have the limits in terms of the actual installed megawatts. We also have the limit in the sense that we can't build anything larger than the local load, than the load on that site. So is there any, I mean, I know one of the objectives of the in the document is to use everything, to use the entire program, and also an orderly transition. But really, are these limits necessary, or is it really just some kind of way to sort of slow down the solar industry? Jonathan, if you want to comment, great. If not, then I think, as I said, you're allowed to dodge this one. Otherwise, we'll open it up. And if Sean and Mike and Jeff all want to unmute themselves, love to start with this topic.
I can start, and others can fill in. But I think that, as I outlined from the other states, that around the region, states are increasing their commitment to distributed generation, and I think that in order to be in line with the decarbonization goals of the state, we would need to do so in Connecticut as well. There's the 80% GHG reduction by 2050, and the requirement through executive order for zero carbon electricity by 2040. And you kind of put those two together, and it's clear that we're going to need a lot more clean electricity than we have right now in order to meet those goals. So staying on the path that we're on isn't enough. We need to ramp up and ensure that and I think that the beneficial electrification, as I mentioned, that decision, that part of the decision recognizes that coming future within the limits that the statute provided to PURA. And if there were, I think that we would love to see the size of these programs increase to reflect that reality of what's coming down the pike.
Mark, it's Mike. I just wanted to reinforce, we've got everything here that we need to be a stronger renewable energy state. And we've got a robust number of contractors here who've got 5, as many as 10 years experience here making this work. We've certainly got demands. We've got, and something we haven't spoken about is utilities. I mean, if you talk to most contractors in the state, they would say that the way that Eversource and UI have managed the ZREC LREC program over the last decade has been terrific. So we've got program managers here who are experienced in making this work, and we like to work with them in the out years too. But we have had some verbal demonstrations and written demonstrations from legislators to say that they have an interest in doing something like this, but it just doesn't happen in the end. So we do what we always do, is we wait for the dust to settle on the current legislative session and wait the next 4 or 5 months for the next one to start. So we're already planning for next session And for those of you on the call who'd like to work with us in the outreach campaign, the legislators, we're conducting a number of tours this summer of commercial solar sites across the state. Folks on the call who haven't walked the solar site are welcome to join us with legislators to help them explain, or help us explain to them, the importance of a bigger and better program.
Great, Mike. If you'll get that information to us, we can distribute it to everybody here. So I think that would be great. I think this is going to take some action. We're going to have to hear from more people, I think. Jeff, did you want to comment on this before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, the value of the distributed energy study that was performed by PURA, I think we just need to have some judicial notice of that recognized. That I see some comments coming across here questioning what's the downside. Does it hurt ratepayers to increase the size of these programs? And I think what we have right now is a situation that if we don't take, if PURA doesn't exercise its requirement to judicially notice what the value is, then I think that it's not in compliance with 1935. 1935 said a value of distributed energy study must be completed and must be established. Well, it's been completed, but it's unclear whether they've accepted the results of it. I think that really needs to be put out there so that we can put a stake in the sand and say, this is how much distributed energy is worth in these different contexts. And therefore, what the new program requires is an auction. Director Ryan mentioned it was like a FIT, but it's an auction at the end of the day. And so if the value comes in below VETR, then there's a benefit to the ratepayer. If it comes in above the VETR rate, then it's a cost to the ratepayer. This just enables us to baseline it and say, this is the cost to the ratepayer. So I think it's just a first step, memorializing this so that we can say, this is what it's costing ratepayers to have 100% clean energy, or this is the benefit. And if it's a benefit to ratepayers, if we bid in 8 cents and the value is 10, then there's a 2-cent benefit. And so we need to ensure that the EDCs don't get that 2 cents, that it goes into some kitty that goes to adders or some other part of the program as incentives to innovate.
Great, Josh. Jeff mentioned the value of distributed energy resource study. And did you want to maybe comment on how PURA considered that in the program design?
Sure, happy to. And I think it's really important to note too, I just want to be clear, it's a joint study between PURA and DEEP. So we are 2 separate agencies. And so that's something that we conducted separately. So jointly, I should say. But so I can speak to how we considered the work that has been done to date in that docket, in this decision. And I think really what it comes down to is understanding the specific application. So it's both this decision and the residential tariff decision. We were directed to consider the results of that study. And so for the residential tariff, I think what we saw was, and just historically in this state, we have all sorts of policy precedent that says that we value these things, we value residential solar, and that we want deployment to be at least as much as we have done historically, at least, right? And I think we saw that in the draft integrated resource plan document from DEEP back in December. So really it became about, and actually going to back to what Sean said, it becomes a question of what do we need to get there, right? What is the megawatt deployment that we need to get there, and to ensure that we have a sustained orderly development of the industry. So, I mean, frankly, we weren't able to, based on that decision, we're looking at least the residential solar decision. There's some footnotes in there that says that the rates looking like it'll be somewhere in the high 20s, right? That decision, is a little bit separate from if that's what's needed to get 50 megawatts per year, 60 megawatts per year for residential. That's kind of separate from that. I would also say similarly, and I would agree with what Jeff's saying in that the value of DER study could be a helpful tool in understanding what is 60 megawatts per year the right number. But when it came down to developing this actual auction, it's, you know, we don't really need to fully understand that value in setting up the auction. Not saying it's not a valuable thing to understand, and especially understanding where we need to go, but at least in understanding the actual design, it wasn't as pertinent. But I will say, and I think what we heard very clear from stakeholders in that process is where it's, you know, where that study is deficient, and where we really need to focus as a state. So I think we hear, you know, Jeff's comments about solar canopies, and I know the great work that the PACE is doing in that area. And that's the reason for these annual adjustments in this program, right? Is so we have the opportunity, hey, maybe we've missed an opportunity so far. How do we make sure we don't miss it again?
Great, thanks, Josh. There have been a couple of questions about the bid preferences or bid adders. And one relates to, here's the question: does the bid adder for distressed muni mean that developers are exempt from the cap up to 20% of the cap if they develop in a distressed muni? Does Bridgeport qualify throughout the city or only in certain neighborhoods? And just in general, I think we've seen other states have adders. The decision talks more about bid preferences, which are a percentage. Can you help us sort of understand how these work? And it's clear there is a process going forward where if we believe there should be other preferences or adders for things like storage or carports or whatever, then there is a way of doing that. But I think I think there's a little confusion on how that works.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm happy to clarify, and then I'd be really interested to hear how other states do it more specifically. So for this one, yeah, historically, how the adders in the LREC-ZREC program have worked and how they will work in the new program is that they're bid preferences. So in other words, the bid will be evaluated a 20% increase, right, or reduction in their price. A reduction to be more accurate in the price, and then compared to other bids. But then the price that they receive is actually not a higher price than what they bid in. It's the bid-in price, but it's just for evaluation purposes that's changed. And that's historically how that's been done with the LREC-ZREC program. To the specific eligibility requirement, so the distressed municipality is a statutory definition, and DECD actually puts out a list of eligible areas. I think it's by zip code, I could be wrong, annually. So it's a project that would be in that's under that specific definition. Project that's in that area would be eligible for that bid adder.
Great, thanks. The question: can you clarify whether the payment for energy under the netting option is all received as a credit on bill, i.e. it's not a check sent to the utility account holder?
I'm sorry, Mark, can you say that one more time?
Can you clarify whether the payment for energy under the netting option is all received as a credit on bill, i.e. it's not a check sent to the utility account holder?
Correct. Yep, it'll be a credit that's on the bill, and any rollover credit will be a monetary credit that will roll over indefinitely.
And do I understand correctly that the energy compensation under the netting tariff cannot go to a third party?
The energy compensation under the netting tariff cannot go to a third party, correct. For the buy-all, both the energy and the REC payment can go to a third party. For the netting, the REC payment can go through to a third party. Apologies. And then of course there's other ways to capture kind of that value from customers, but that would be outside of the program, obviously.
All right, here's another one. How is the customer's current cost per kilowatt hour accounted for when bidding? For example, the current cost could vary from 10 to 26 cents, depending on the rate and utility.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it'll depend on, so when you bid in, you'll identify what customer class you're in. So rate 30, rate 29, rate 1 is residential. That's the other one that came to mind. So you will identify which customer class, and obviously residential is not eligible. Identify which customer class, And then that'll be a preset formula, which again, we're still going to adjudicate that process and get people's input on for what the avoided energy part is. So it's just the kilowatt hour, the charges per kilowatt hour avoided. That will be the energy compensation. And that's why I was really talking about earlier, that doesn't make up your full bill, right? There's a customer charge, and then there's also a demand charge for commercial and industrial customers. So it's just looking at that kilowatt hour charge, and then it'll be dependent on which customer class you're in.
Great. Another question in the chat is, are REC caps calculated based on financial goals of power retailers or technical needs of generator distributors?
The bid cap, I'm unclear if the question is asking about the megawatt caps or if it's asking about the REC cap. If it's about the REC cap, so in statute we were asked to set a cap for what the bids could be, which wasn't just for REC compensation, it was both energy and RECs. And we set that rate at essentially what is going to be likely the highest rate, which is the small emissions project category. So we can get essentially price formation and price project cost data, because the structure, as we walk through it today, right, is very different than the current one. So we set a fairly high or the highest possible cap that at least I think we could have set to allow for price discovery under that. So then we are better informed moving forward. Same question for megawatt caps. I saw that. That one I could not speak to how that was set. I don't know.
Right. All right. We've got a follow-up here on the adders for, and so I've asked Diane to go ahead and unmute yourself. Diane, if you'd like to ask a follow-up question. And I think in general now, anyone, we haven't gotten to every single question here. So if you have a question that we didn't get to, or just have another question you'd like to ask, try using the raise hand option, which should be one of the options if you go under and one of the buttons at the bottom of your screen, and then we will ask you to unmute yourself. So go ahead and try the raise hand option for now. If not, we'll just open everybody up. But Diane, do you want to follow up on the adders?
Yeah, I was just wondering, given the megawatt cap seems to be unusually low relative to our surrounding states, could the canopies or the development in distressed municipalities be exempt from those caps as a way for the governor to jumpstart the industry, even if it can't get through the legislature? With the grounds that he's, pushing the economy forward in response to the pandemic?
Is that directed? Oh, anyone? Go ahead. John.
I was going to say I'm not a lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt. But I think that would have to come through statute.
Yeah, that would be also not a lawyer, but that would be my guess. It's an interesting idea, though.
Mike, would you like to unmute yourself? Mike Trahan.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Quick question for Josh. Josh, the small ZREC bucket, there's a balance. At what point are those funds exhausted or withdrawn?
The current program or the new program?
Current program.
Current program. That's a great question. I do not know where it's currently where we're at, but those funds should be eligible. There, as you know, Mike, there's plenty of funds available in that program, and it should be through the end of the year at a minimum.
Thank you.
Josh, we had a conversation, I know, before the session, and the decision's clear that it applies to solar projects under 2 megawatt. And I know we were curious about some of the larger utility scale projects, and so they are not under this decision, but do you want to maybe speak briefly about how those get regulated?
Yeah, it's a good question. So generally speaking, very generally speaking, so we have the SCEF program, right? The Shared Clean Energy Facility Program, and those are for facilities up to 4 megawatts. So we have that separate program. We have this new non-residential program for up to 2 megawatt systems. And then, generally speaking, there's a question of jurisdiction between us and FERC or ISO New England. And generally speaking, that cutoff is applied at about 5 megawatts. And so for projects under 5 megawatts, and folks might be familiar with PURA, which is essentially a preset tariff amount, we're actually undergoing a process to approve and update those regulations, and then which will eventually lead to a tariff and a tariff rate for all projects that are under 5 megawatts at a minimum. And then generally speaking, projects that are above 5 megawatts are selected through state procurements, right? So state procurements are almost exclusively run by, I can't think of any other, maybe I guess the new fuel cell procurement, are run by DEEP. And there's also an interesting, and we talked about, Mark, and with you and Bernie, about how it's actually interesting. There's other states that actually pick things in their RFP processes that actually don't come before us for approval because they're selecting it out of state. And it's and it gets interconnected here. And the gravel pit project is a good example of Rhode Island actually picked a large portion of that. So we have this interesting kind of regulatory system, but so we really focus on things under 5 megawatts and what we can do there. And we are really looking towards, I mentioned those annual solicitations annual dockets, review dockets. We're really trying to move towards a more thoughtful and comprehensive suite of programs for everything that's under 5 megawatts. And the PURA rate and regulations is really a part of that.
Great, thanks. Bernie, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Question for Josh, and it's a clarification question. Certainly under net metering, under the new program, you are tied to the local load with a little bit of expansion that you can bring in other sort of ratepayers. I had been under the impression that the sell-all tariff, you weren't tied to the local load, that it was kind of a function of how much roof you had, how much you could generate, and you could sell whatever you could make. It's not, I think I have that wrong. Could you just sort of restate the?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not the statutory interpretation that is included in the decision. I think the size to load, and again, not a lawyer, but if memory serves, the size to load parameters are inclusive of both tariff options. So it really does need to be size to the actual load there. But under that description or that requirement, that's where we tried to find a way that we could then say, okay, but on site you can virtually net meter essentially, right? But unfortunately, that's not allowed, Bernie.
Thank you very much.
Jeff, there was a question in the chat about the megawatt capacity of this Lancaster site, and I'm going to guess they don't. They're not limited by the local load there, or is the question was how big in terms of megawatts is that Lancaster site? Not sure if you're speaking, but you may be on mute if you are. All right. Well, I have enabled anyone to unmute themselves, so I don't see any raised hands right now. But
I see Mark Robbins has his physical hand up.
Great. So unmute yourself and ask away, please. I didn't see that.
You have to unmute Mark Robbins.
All right.
Good.
And Jeff?
Okay. Can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, terrific presentation. I mean, Mark, Scully, and your team, and Patrice, and everybody involved, to Josh. I mean, I want to replay this several times, but thank you so much. Very encouraging to see everybody engaged in this and sharing this brain trust. So as project developer consultant, we're trying to cobble together and exploit the various federal and utility incentives to mobilize clean energy projects. With in mind that many cases we have clients that have greater needs for energy than can be implemented given the caps within the medium ZREC program, for example. So separate from the local utility, the REC incentives, there are class one RECs through the NEPOOL PURA program, I believe. And my question is, can we, for example, if we have a client that has a 1 megawatt annual electric usage, and we've been awarded a medium ZREC capped at 249 kW, could we build a 500 kW system behind the meter on the roof of that 1 megawatt client, build a half a megawatt system, and secure a medium ZREC for the 249 kW, and put the balance on a class one REC. So 2 REC meters, 1 interconnection, both behind the meter. Is that doable? So can we pair multiple REC meters to help underwrite a system, assuming that we get through the interconnection approval, that we can net it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have, so I don't want to give you the wrong answer. And so what I would say is, so my understanding of the program and the statutes and recollection is that moving forward, the net metering tariff that's statutorily authorized ends at the end of this calendar year, and does not move forward after this calendar year. So there will not be a separate netting tariff that you could take advantage of and then sell your RECs into the NEPOOL GIS system. So my off the cuff answer is probably not, but frankly, Mike and Jeff and Sean might be more familiar with the ins and outs of, from your all's perspective, if that would be allowed. But that's my initial take. But happy to think about it or look at it more closely.
Great, thanks. I see that not everybody's able to unmute, even though I tried to.
I think
that. Is that Miguel? Are you able to unmute and ask?
Yes, sir. If it's possible, I just want to get one quick question. Josh, one clarification. I think you kind of mentioned this. I just want to be absolutely sure, right? A couple comments have suggested this program is very similar to a feed-in tariff or to virtual net metering really has been made. I just want to be clear, under the buy-all option, you still do have to have load on site. Is that correct? So while it is a cash payment and it is sized to the load on site, there must be load, right? It's not to say like this is in Rhode Island in a reg program, like an absolute pure feed-in tariff. It is a cash payment, but it is limited to the on-site load of the load at the site. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yep.
Right. So virtual net metering still in Connecticut is limited to municipal customers, and it must be sited on a municipal site to actually.
Yep. State, agricultural, and municipal.
All right. I appreciate that. And let me make one other comment. That being said, if it's a cash or monetary payment, is it possible to size to the customer's monetary obligation on their bill, which is to say slightly beyond their volumetric load, such that you could offset their demand charges, or is it literally limited to the volumetric load of the site?
I believe, subject to check, that this decision says size to annual kilowatt hour load.
Okay.
Happy to be corrected on that though.
All right. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
Terrific. If anyone, looks like Mackie has a question. Are you able to unmute yourself, Mackie? No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I was. Okay. Hey, everyone. Thanks for arranging this. This has been fantastic. You got a huge component of the Green Bank on here. Quick question for, I guess for Josh. The virtual net tariff or virtual net metering, whatever you want to call it, under the new program. Your interpretation of the owned premises, the customer owning the premises and the beneficial accounts. For the beneficial accounts, do all of them have to be one of the owner of the premises, or can, as long as you have one of the beneficial accounts the same as the owner of the premises, the other beneficial accounts do not have to have any ownership of the site?
Yep. Good question. And I should have given this caveat earlier, is on some of these questions, they might actually have to come before us for a formal decision at some point. So I'm trying to give my best answers. I understand it, but we might have to adjudicate any of this later. We don't explicitly address that, is what made me give that caveat. I would imagine, so one could reasonably interpret it as only needing one of those customers to own the site.
Great. So I get to be explicit, you could have town A on a field and have town A, all their accounts rolled into one, and they are the beneficiary. And then you have, 5 more beneficial accounts left. Town B, town C, town D could participate in that project.
Yep, I think that is I think that's a reasonable interpretation. And I would say too, the new way that we interpreted the term beneficial accounts would seem to lead to that conclusion.
Yes, and I appreciate that. I think y'all did an incredible job of taking what was a good statute and making it even as preferable, as helpful as possible for the solar industry. It's a great work.
Thanks.
Josh, this is Peter Millman. If a commercial ratepayer is contemplating having a storage battery soon or sometime in the future, the only option for is the net metering tariff. Is that correct?
No, I'm glad you. I'm glad you brought this up. So in case you missed it slide, PURA, and was it last Wednesday, we approved a new storage program, which the Green Bank with the EDCs will be administering. So no, that program will be effective January 1 of next year.
Okay, I'll look for it. Thanks.
I asked this question in the chat. This is Mickey Toro from CTEC, and I got an answer, but I just wanted to kind of have somebody voice their opinion here. How are landfills going to benefit from this program? You're offering adders, but yet if there's no on-site load, you're really limited to what you can do there. We currently have 4 or 5 that were part of the V&M that did not get into the queue or in the queue, but didn't benefit from those V&M credits because it was capped and ended. I was hoping this would be another avenue to take. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. Am I missing something here? Anyone?
Not from my perspective, unfortunately.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood. Can you explain why there's adders for landfills and brownfields?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly, I think it's still a priority to try and cite there. So I think it will be applicable to virtual net metering facilities. In terms of the on-site load requirements, yeah, there isn't much there for us to do, unfortunately.
All right, thank you.
Mark, I think you're muted.
I'm actually muted. Sean, did you want to ask a question?
I didn't want to ask a question. I wasn't able to unmute myself during the storage discussion, but just I know Josh is probably sick of hearing me talk about storage at this point because we were participating in that as well. But I think that decision does present an opportunity to pair resources in this program with the resources developed through that storage program, and could really provide really great opportunities. So we're excited to see how that works out. Yeah, so a little bit afterwards, but appreciate you taking me.
Great. Chris, are you able to unmute yourself?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question goes to Josh, and it addresses a question that was asked earlier regarding the person cited an example of a medium ZREC, and the request was, could they utilize the medium ZREC kind of scenario and then build additional solar and just pair it with a class 1 rec? And in your answer, you indicated that the net metering classification of the state was sort of ending at the end of the year. Okay, and I can understand that, but what would prevent a commercial industrial client that has a substantial load to simply build behind the meter solar and not participate in the Eversource program whatsoever? That client would not be relying on exporting. All of the generation of the solar would go to behind the meter load. And that client should have the right to utilize the class 1 recs that are available under ISO New England. What would prevent that, Josh, and even in this new program?
It's a good question. It actually came, someone asked me that question, I want to say 2 days ago now. And my response is, where were you 3 months ago? No, it's a fantastic question. And actually, all kidding aside, I think some of the questions that we've had today and that level of detail, you heard the presentation, right, and saw the slides. And the decision 60 pages, right? So there's always more details and things that we need to fine tune. And so really the process that we're gonna have for this year, where all the program documents come in for our review and approval and stakeholder input, I think some of these questions are primed for that process. The answer, I think the answer to your question is, I think if I'm understanding, I'd have to think a lot more about this and cross-reference the statutes. But I think it sounds like it might technically be disallowed. But to your point of what would stop them, if the utility found out, then they would technically not be eligible. I guess it's a hypothetical that I probably shouldn't be trying to answer there. But it's certainly an interesting question, and one we'll have to think about. And like I said, the process coming up.
Let me just simply add this, because one of the earlier presentations was on the other states in New England, and in Massachusetts, in the SMART program, there are a substantial number of projects today that, because of the SMART program's declining block, that it's actually more attractive financially not to participate in SMART whatsoever, right? And so, I think it becomes something of rather importance, because if it's behind the meter, then the utility does not have jurisdiction as long as it's in compliance with a national electric codes and the overall electrical technology. And then on the class 1 rec, I think it becomes more of a legal issue that I certainly don't have the answer on, and that is, who is able to dictate, who is able to own and market class 1 recs.
Yep. No, it's a great question.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're over 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I want to thank our panelists. Josh, thank you so much. Incredible overview, and thank you for staying so long, answering every question. Sean, Mike, Jeff, thank you so much. I think incredible insight, breadth of knowledge here.